Hello, this is Brian, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the January 27th issue of the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier radio reading service. Mark Carney insists he meant what he said in Davos speech after Trump official claims Prime Minister walked back comments in call with U.S. President. Prime Minister Mark Carney denied Tuesday a claim by one of Donald Trump's top officials that he is now aggressively walking back his Davos speech that challenged the economically coercive agenda of the U.S. To be absolutely clear, and I said this to the president, I meant what I said in Davos. It was clear it was a broader set of issues, that Canada was the first country to understand the change in U.S. trade policy that he had initiated, and we're responding to that, Carney said. Carney confirmed Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent's revelation Monday night on Fox News that he had indeed spoken with the U.S. President Monday, which neither he nor his office had revealed to Canadians. But the Prime Minister cast the conversation differently, saying, as he had earlier Monday, that he stood by his rallying cry to middle power countries to form new strategic alliances to withstand what he said was the end of the international rules-based order. On the defensive on his way into a Tuesday morning cabinet meeting, the Prime Minister told reporters Trump called him Monday, nearly a week after the Prime Minister left Davos and skipped Trump's own speech to the World Economic Forum the following day. The Prime Minister instead, he explained to Trump his recent deal with China in the context of seeking new partnerships abroad, whilst building stronger trade capacity at home and seeking to strengthen the current trilateral Canada-US-Mexico Free Trade Agreement, or CUSMA, which is up for review this year. We had a very good conversation on a range of subjects, ranging from situation in Ukraine, in Venezuela, Arctic security. We discussed as well what Canada is doing positively, and this is the context of our discussion, what Canada is doing positively to build new partnerships around the world. I explained to him our arrangement with China. I explained to him what we're doing, 12 new deals on 4 continents in 6 months. He was impressed, and what we intend to do going forward, as well as the opportunity to, of course, move forward on CUSMA. Carney noted Canada-U.S. Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc had a similar conversation with one of his counterparts, Trump's U.S. Trade Representative, Jameson Greer, Monday. We're responding positively by building partnerships abroad. We're responding positively by building at home. And we are prepared to respond positively by building that new relationship through CUSMA. He understood that, and it was a good conversation, as I say. Asked to confirm that he did not walk back his comments as Bessent claimed Monday night, Carney said no as he walked away. Trump threatened via a Truth Social post on the weekend to impose 100% tariffs on all Canadian products shipped into the U.S. if Canada did a deal with China. That said, Bessent would be a disaster for Canada. I was in the Oval Office with the President today. He spoke to Prime Minister Carney, who was very aggressively walking back some of the unfortunate remarks he made. I'm not sure what the Prime Minister was thinking, Bessent said. He underscored Canada's dependence on the U.S., saying there's more north-south trade than there could ever be east-west trade. He talks about middle countries having to do their own thing, and I'm old enough to remember when French President François Mitterrand tried to go down that route. It failed back in the 80s, and it will fail now. Canada is linked to the U.S., and the Prime Minister should do what's best for the Canadian people, rather than trying to push his own globalist agenda. World pauses to commemorate International Holocaust Remembrance Day. Holocaust survivors, politicians, and regular people commemorated International Holocaust Remembrance Day on Tuesday, gathering at somber events across Europe and beyond to reflect on Nazi Germany's killing of millions of people. International Holocaust Remembrance Day is observed across each year on January 27th, the anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau, the most notorious of the Nazi German death camps. The UN General Assembly adopted a resolution in 2005 establishing the day as an annual commemoration. The attempt carried out by Nazi Germany to erase the Jews from the face of Europe encapsulates, in an emblematic way, all the evil that human beings are capable of committing when they allow themselves to be infected out of superficiality, indifference, cowardice, or self-interest by the virus of hatred, racism, and oppression, Italian President Sergio Mattarella said in a gathering with survivors in Rome. At Auschwitz, located in an area of southern Poland which was under German occupation during World War II, Polish President Karol Nawrocki joined survivors for a remembrance ceremony that ended with Jewish and Christian clergy reciting prayers. Bernard Alphen, a 96-year-old survivor, told participants that in today's world he sees signs I know too well. I see hatred resurgent. I see violence beginning to be justified once again, Alphen said. I see people who believe their anger is more valuable than another human life. I say this because I am an old man who has seen where indifference leads to. And I say this because I believe that. I truly believe that we can choose differently. Nazi German forces killed some 1.1 million people at Auschwitz, most of them Jews, but also Poles, Roma, and others. The camp was liberated by the Soviet Army on January 27, 1945. In all, 6 million Jews were killed in the Holocaust, in ghettos, concentration camps, and shot at close range in the fields and forests of Eastern Europe. In the heart of Berlin, candles burned at the memorial to the murdered Jews of Europe, a field of 2,700 gray concrete slabs, which honors the 6 million victims and stands as a powerful symbol of Germany's remorse. Other countries are still struggling to come to terms with the complicity of their ancestors. Mattarella condemned the complicity of ordinary Italians in the fascist era racial laws, which persecuted Italy's Jewish community and deportation of its Jews. As in recent years, Russia representatives were not invited to the observances at Auschwitz due to the country's invasion of Ukraine. Become my witness. Pavel Helenek, a 90-year-old survivor from the city of Liberec, a Czech city with a pre-war Jewish population of 1,350, told those gathered in the upper house of the Czech parliament that he was now the last living of the 37 Jews who returned to the city after the war. There are an estimated 196,600 Jewish Holocaust survivors still alive globally, down from 220,000 a year ago, according to the New York-based Conference on Jewish Material Claims Against Germany. Their median age is 87, and nearly all, some 97%, are child survivors who were born 1928 and later, the group said. Though the world's community of survivors is shrinking, some are still telling their stories for the first time after all these years. In Britain, King Charles and Queen Camilla had a reception for survivors. A Holocaust survivor also addressed the British cabinet in what Prime Minister Keir Starmer described as a first. Government members wiped away tears as 95-year-old Mala Tribich described how Germany's invasion of Poland in 1939 destroyed her childhood. She recalled being forced into hard labor at the age of 12 as the first Nazi ghetto was established in her hometown of Piotrko Tribulitsky, and spoke of the hunger, disease, and suffering there. The Nazis killed her mother, father, and sister. She was sent to Ravensbrück and then to Bergen-Belsen, where she was liberated by the British Army in April 1945. She urged the cabinet members to fight anti-Semitism and to remember. Soon there will be no eyewitnesses left, she told them. That is why I ask you today not just to listen, but to become my witness. Unity that saves lives is needed. Many leaders also reflected on the upheaval in today's world. Kaja Kallas, the European Union's foreign policy chief, warned about rising anti-Semitism and new threats. She noted that AI-generated content is now being used to blur the line between fact and fiction, distort historical truth, and undermine our collective memory. Ukraine's president, Volodymyr Zelensky, whose country has been under attack from Russia for 4 years, said that just as the world united to defeat the Nazis in 1945, it must act the same way now. Whenever hatred and war threaten nations, unity that saves lives is needed, Zelensky said. Russian drones kill 3 and wound children in Ukraine as Zelensky urges speedier diplomacy. A heavy Russian drone bombardment of Ukraine's southern city of Odessa killed at least 3 people and wounded 23, including 2 children and a pregnant woman, officials said Tuesday, as Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky called for speedier U.S. efforts to end Russia's almost 4-year invasion of his country. The Odessa attack involved more than 50 drones, some of them models recently upgraded by Russia to improve their range and strike power, according to Ukrainian authorities. The drones targeted the power grid, which Russia has repeatedly bombarded during the coldest winter in years, and also hit 5 apartment blocks, officials said. Emergency crews retrieved the bodies of 2 men, aged 90 and 52, and a woman from the rubble, authorities said. The rescue operation will continue until the fate of all people who may be under the rubble is clarified, Zelensky said on the Telegram messaging app, adding that an informal Protestant place of worship was also damaged. Each such Russian strike undermines diplomacy, which is still ongoing, and hits, in particular, the efforts of partners who are helping end this war, he said. A diplomatic push by the Trump administration to end the war has made progress, according to officials, but has delivered no breakthrough on the key issue of what happens to Russian-occupied Ukrainian land and other territory that Moscow is demanding. Analysts say that Russian President Vladimir Putin is in no rush to find a settlement, despite his army's difficulties on the roughly 600-mile front line. He believes that time is on his side, that Western support for Kiev will fade, and that Ukraine's resistance will eventually break under pressure, according to analysts. To replenish its forces and keep up the pressure on Kiev, Moscow is offering cash bonuses, freeing convicts from prison, and luring foreigners to its army. An Associated Press investigation found that unwitting Bangladeshi workers were enticed to Russia under the false promise of civilian work before being thrown into combat in Ukraine. Zelensky said late Monday the next round of talks with the United States and Russia is penciled in for February 1st, but that it would be good if this meeting could be accelerated. He also urged that, in the meantime, additional sanctions be imposed on Russia to compel the Kremlin to make compromises. Russia fired 165 drones at Ukraine overnight, with 24 of them that got through air defenses hitting targets in 7 regions, according to Ukraine's Air Force. In recent weeks, the relentless barrages have damaged some of Ukraine's protected World Heritage sites in Odessa, the western city of Lviv, and the capital Kiev, UNESCO said Tuesday. They have also knocked out power to hundreds of thousands of civilians. More than 900 apartment blocks remained without heating Tuesday in several districts of Kiev, Zelensky said. Kiev, a city of about 3 million people, is dominated by tower blocks, many from the Soviet era. Russia has been improving its drone technology and tactics, striking Ukraine with increasing success. The Ukrainian Defense Ministry's main intelligence directorate said earlier this month that Russia had deployed the new jet-powered Goran 5 strike drone against Ukraine for the first time. The Goran is a Russian variant of the Iranian-designed Shahed. According to the directorate, the drone can carry a 200-pound warhead and has a range of nearly 600 miles. In response, Ukraine has significantly expanded production of interceptor drones, as well as developing its own long-range drones. The Russian Defense Ministry said Tuesday that its air defenses shot down 19 Ukrainian drones overnight over several Russian regions. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier radio reading service. Doomsday clock moves closer to midnight over threats from nuclear weapons, climate change, and AI. Earth is closer than it's ever been to destruction as Russia, China, the U.S., and other countries become increasingly aggressive, adversarial, and nationalistic, a science-oriented advocacy group said Tuesday, and advanced its doomsday clock to 85 seconds till midnight. The Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists cited risks of nuclear war, climate change, potential misuse of biotechnology, and the increasing use of artificial intelligence without adequate controls as it made the annual announcement, which rates how close humanity is from ending. Last year, the clock advanced to 89 seconds to midnight. Since then, hard-won global understandings are collapsing, accelerating a winner-takes-all great power competition and undermining the international cooperation needed to reduce existential risks, the group said. They worry about the threat of escalating conflicts involving nuclear-armed countries, citing the Russia-Ukraine war, May's conflict between India and Pakistan, and whether Iran is capable of developing nuclear weapons after strikes last summer by the U.S. and Israel. International trust and cooperation is essential because, if the world splinters into an us versus them zero-sum approach, it increases the likelihood that we all lose, said Daniel Holz, chair of the group's Science and Security Board. The group also highlighted droughts, heat waves, and floods linked to global warming, as well as the failure of nations to adopt meaningful agreements to fight global warming, singling out U.S. President Donald Trump's efforts to boost fossil fuels and hobble renewable energy production. Starting in 1947, the advocacy group used a clock to symbolize the potential and even likelihood of people doing something to end humanity. At the end of the Cold War, it was as close as 17 minutes to midnight. In the past few years, to address rapid global changes, the group has changed from counting down to the minutes until midnight to counting down the seconds. The group said the clock could be turned back if leaders and nations work together to address existential risks. Minneapolis shooting scrambles Second Amendment politics for Trump. Prominent Republicans and gun rights advocates helped elicit a White House turnabout this week after bristling over the administration's characterization of Alex Preddy, the second person killed this month by a federal officer in Minneapolis, as responsible for his own death because he lawfully possessed a weapon. The death produced no clear shifts in U.S. gun politics or policies, even as President Donald Trump shuffles the lieutenants in charge of his militarized immigration crackdown. But important voices in Trump's coalition have called for a thorough investigation of Preddy's death, while also criticizing inconsistencies in some Republicans' Second Amendment stances. If the dynamic persists, it could give Republicans problems as Trump heads into a midterm election year with voters already growing skeptical of his overall immigration approach. The concern is acute enough that Trump's top spokeswoman sought Monday to reassert his brand as a staunch gun rights supporter. The president supports the Second Amendment rights of law-abiding American citizens, absolutely, White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt told reporters. Leavitt qualified that, when you are bearing arms and confronted by law enforcement, you are raising the risk of force being used against you. Videos contradict early statements from the administration. That still marked a retreat from the administration's previous messages about the shooting of Preddy. It came the same day the president dispatched border czar Tom Homan to Minnesota, seemingly elevating him over Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem and Border Patrol Chief Greg Bovino, who had been in charge in Minneapolis. Within hours of Preddy's death on Saturday, Bovino suggested Preddy wanted to massacre law enforcement, and Noem said Preddy was brandishing a weapon and acted violently toward officers. "I don't know of any peaceful protester that shows up with a gun and ammunition rather than a sign," Noem said. White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller, an architect of Trump's mass deportation effort, went further on X, declaring Preddy an assassin. Bystander videos contradicted each claim, instead showing Preddy holding a cell phone and helping a woman who had been pepper sprayed by a federal officer. Within seconds, Preddy was sprayed too and taken to the ground by multiple officers. No video disclosed thus far has shown him unholstering his concealed weapon, which he had a Minnesota permit to carry. It appeared that one officer took Preddy's gun and walked away with it just before shots began. As multiple videos went viral online and on television, Vice President J.D. Vance reposted Miller's assessment, while Trump shared an alleged photo of the gunman's gun, loaded, with 2 additional full magazines. On Tuesday, Trump was asked if he agreed with Miller's comment describing Preddy as an assassin, and answered no. But he added that protesters can't have guns and said he wants the death investigated. "You can't walk in with guns, you just can't," Trump told reporters on the White House lawn before departing for a trip to Iowa. Swift reactions from gun rights advocates. The National Rifle Association, which has backed Trump 3 times, released a statement that began by casting blame on Minnesota Democrats it accused of stoking protests. But the group lashed out after a federal prosecutor in California said on X that if you approach law enforcement with a gun, there is a high likelihood they will be legally justified in shooting you. That analysis, the NRA said, is dangerous and wrong. FBI Director Kash Patel magnified the blowback Sunday on Fox News' Sunday Morning Futures with Maria Bartiromo. "No one," Patel said, "can bring a firearm loaded with multiple magazines to any sort of protest that you want. It's that simple." Eric Pratt, Vice President of Gun Owners of America, was incredulous. "I have attended protest rallies while armed and no one got injured," he said on CNN. Conservative officials around the country made the same connection between the First and Second Amendments. "Showing up at a protest is very American. Showing up with a weapon is very American," State Representative Jerry Faison, who leads the GOP caucus in Tennessee, said on X. Trump's first-term vice president, Mike Pence, called for a full and transparent investigation of this officer-involved shooting. A different response from the past. Liberals, conservatives, and nonpartisan experts noted how the administration's response differed from past conservative positions involving protests and weapons. Multiple Trump supporters were found to have weapons during the January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol. Trump issued blanket pardons to all of them. Republicans were critical in 2020 when Mark and Patricia McCloskey had to pay fines after pointing guns at protesters who marched through their St. Louis neighborhood after the police killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis. And then there's Kyle Rittenhouse, a counter-protester, acquitted after fatally shooting 2 men and injuring another in Kenosha, Washington during the post-Floyd protests. You remember Kyle Rittenhouse and how he was made a hero on the right? Trey Gowdy, a Republican former congressman and attorney for Trump during one of his first-term impeachments. Alex Preddy's firearm was being lawfully carried. He never brandished it. Adam Winkler, a UCLA law professor, who has studied the history of the gun debate, said the fallout shows how tribal we've become. Republicans spent years talking about the Second Amendment as a means to fight government tyranny, he said. The moment someone who's thought to be from the left, they abandoned that principled stance, Winkler said. Meanwhile, Democrats who have criticized open and concealed carry laws for years, Winkler added, are not amplifying that position after Preddy's death. Uncertain effects in an election year. The blowback against the administration from core Trump supporters comes as Republicans are trying to protect their threadbare majority in the U.S. House and face several competitive Senate races. Perhaps reflecting the stakes, GOP staff and campaign aides were reticent Monday to talk about the issue at all. The House Republican campaign chairman, Representative Richard Hudson of North Carolina, is sponsoring the GOP's most significant gun legislation of this congressional term, a proposal to make state concealed carry permits reciprocal across all states. The bill cleared the House Judiciary Committee last fall. Asked Monday whether Preddy's death and the Minneapolis protests might affect debate, an aide to Speaker Mike Johnson did not offer any update on the bill's prospects. Gun rights advocates have notched many legislative victories in Republican-controlled state houses in recent decades, from rolling back gun-free zones around schools and churches to expanding gun possession rights in schools, on university campuses, and in other public spaces. William Sack, legal director of the Second Amendment Foundation, said he was surprised and disappointed by the administration's initial statements following the Preddy shooting. Trump's vacillating, he said, is very likely to cost them dearly with the core of a constituency they count on. Authorities accused motorcycle and street gang members of targeting Indiana judge for assassination. Members of a motorcycle club and a street gang clearly targeted an Indiana judge for assassination, police said Tuesday, days after officers arrested 5 people in connection with the attack. Police and prosecutors at a news conference praised what they characterized as a relentless effort to track down who opened fire on Tippecanoe County Superior Court Judge Stephen Meyer and his wife Kim at their home in Lafayette on January 18th. Both Meyer and his wife suffered gunshot wounds but survived. The Lafayette Police Department, the FBI, the Indiana State Police, and the Purdue University Police Department launched a search for the shooter that went on for days before apprehending 5 people in synchronized arrests Thursday evening, including 4 in Indiana and 1 in Lexington, Kentucky. Court appearances for the suspects were set for Wednesday in Indiana and Kentucky. This attack was more than an assault on 2 citizens, Lafayette Police Chief Scott Galloway said. This was an assault on the rule of law itself. Prosecutors alleged that the attack was designed to derail a domestic abuse case against Thomas Moss, a member of the Detroit-based Phantom MC motorcycle club with ties to the Vice Lord street gang. According to a probable cause affidavit, the Vice Lords offered the victim in the case $10,000 not to testify against Moss, but she refused. With Moss's trial set to begin on January 20th in front of Meyer, another Phantom MC member, Blake Smith, purchased a shotgun. A masked man traveled to the Myers home armed with that shotgun on January 18th. He lured the couple to the door by saying he was looking for his dog, shot them through the door, and fled. Meyer was targeted, Indiana State Police Lieutenant Colonel Al Williamson said at Tuesday's news conference. They went after him for a reason. Police recovered the mask, the shooter's clothing, and the shotgun discarded near the Myers home. DNA on the mask matched Raylan Ferguson, an associate of the almighty Vice Lord Nation from Lexington, Kentucky, according to the affidavit. Surveillance video showed a car that was parked near the Myers home had traveled from Kentucky, toward Lafayette on January 16th and traveled toward Smith's residence in the hour after the shootings, according to the affidavit. Moss, Ferguson, and Smith each face multiple charges, including attempted murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Amanda Millsap, whom prosecutors allege offered the bribe in the domestic abuse case, faces bribery and obstruction counts. Seneda Greer, a woman Ferguson lives with, has been charged with helping a criminal and obstruction. Prosecutors have accused her of traveling to Lafayette with Ferguson. Millsap's attorney, Earl McCoy, didn't immediately respond to an email seeking comment. Online court records did not list attorneys for Moss, Ferguson, or Blake. Jail records indicate Greer is being held in Lexington. Online court records in that state did not list an attorney for her. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier radio reading service. Trump's immigration crackdown led to drop in U.S. growth rate last year as population hit 342 million. President Donald Trump's crackdown on immigration contributed to a year-to-year drop in the nation's growth rate as the U.S. population reached nearly 342 million people in 2025, according to population estimates released Tuesday by the U.S. Census Bureau. The 0.5% growth rate for 2025 was a sharp drop from 2024's almost 1% growth rate, which was the highest in 2 decades and was fueled by immigration. The 2024 estimates put the U.S. population at 340 million people. Immigration increased by almost 1.3 million people last year, compared with 2024's increase of 2.8 million people. If trends continue, the gain from immigrants in mid-2026 will drop to only 321,000 people, according to the Census Bureau, whose estimates do not distinguish between legal and illegal immigration. In the past 125 years, the lowest growth rate was in 2021 during the height of the coronavirus pandemic, when the U.S. population grew by just 0.16%, or 522,000 people, and immigration increased by just 376,000 people because of travel restrictions into the U.S. Before that, the lowest growth rate was just under 0.5% in 1919 at the height of the Spanish flu. Births outnumbered deaths last year by 519,000 people. While higher than the pandemic-era low at the beginning of the decade, the natural increase was dramatically smaller than in the 2000s, when it ranged between 1.6 million and 1.9 million people. Lower immigration stunts growth in many states. The immigration drop dented growth in several states that traditionally have been immigrant magnets. California had a net population loss of 9,500 people in 2025, a stark change from the previous year when it gained 232,000 residents, even though roughly the same number of Californians already living in the state moved out in both years. The difference was immigration, since the number of net immigrants who moved into the state dropped from 361,000 people in 2024 to 109,000 in 2025. Florida had year-to-year drops in both immigrants and people moving in from other states. The Sunshine State, which has become more expensive in recent years from surging property values and higher home insurance costs, had only 22,000 domestic migrants in 2025, compared with 64,000 people in 2024, and the net number of immigrants dropped from more than 411,000 people to 178,000 people. New York added only 1,008 people in 2025, mostly because the state's net migration from immigrants dropped from 207,000 people to 95,600 people. South Carolina, India, and North Carolina had the highest year-over-year growth rates, ranging from 1.3% to 1.5%. Texas, Florida, and North Carolina added the most people in pure numbers. California, Hawaii, New Mexico, Vermont, and West Virginia had population declines. The South which has been the powerhouse of growth in the 2020s, continued to add more people than any other region, but the numbers dropped from 1.7 million people in 2025 to 1.1 million in 2025. Many of these states are going to show even smaller growth when we get to next year, Brookings demographer William Frey said Tuesday. The effects of Trump's immigration crackdown. Tuesday's data release comes as researchers have been trying to determine the effects of the second Trump administration's immigration crackdown after the Republican president returned to the White House in January 2025. Trump made a surge of migrants at the southern border a central issue in his winning 2024 presidential campaign. The numbers made public Tuesday reflect change from July 2024 to July 2025, covering the end of President Joe Biden's Democratic administration and the first half of Trump's first year back in office. The figures capture a period that reflects the beginning of enforcement surges in Los Angeles and Portland, Oregon, but do not capture the impact on immigration after the Trump administration's crackdowns began in Chicago, New Orleans, Memphis, Tennessee, and Minneapolis, Minnesota. The 2025 numbers were a jarring divergence from 2024, when net international migration accounted for 84% of the nation's 3.3 million person increase from the year before. The jump in immigration 2 years ago was partly because of a new method of counting that added people who were admitted for humanitarian reasons. They do reflect recent trends we have seen in outmigration, where the numbers of people coming in is down and the numbers going out is up, Eric Jensen, a senior research scientist at the Census Bureau, said last week. How the population estimates are calculated. Unlike the once-in-a-decade census, which determines how many congressional seats and electoral college votes each state gets, as well as the distribution of $2.8 trillion in annual government funding, the population estimates are calculated from government records and internal Census Bureau data. The release of the 2025 population estimates was delayed by the federal government shutdown last fall and comes out at a challenging time for the Census Bureau and other U.S. statistical agencies. The Bureau, which is the largest statistical agency in the U.S., lost about 15% of its workforce last year due to buyouts and layoffs that were part of cost-cutting efforts by the White House and its Department of Government Efficiency. Other recent actions by the Trump administration, such as the firing of Erica McIntarfer as Bureau of Labor Statistics Commissioner, have raised concerns about political meddling at U.S. statistical agencies. But Frey said the Bureau's staffers appear to have been doing this work as usual without interference. So I have no reason to doubt the numbers that come out, Frey said. Russian forces begin pulling out of bases in northeast Syria. Russian forces have begun pulling out of positions in northeast Syria, in an area still controlled by the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces, after the group lost most of its territory in an offensive by government forces. Associated Press journalists visited one base next to the Kamashli airport Tuesday and found it guarded by SDF fighters who said the Russians had begun moving their equipment out in recent days. Inside what had been living quarters for the soldiers was largely empty, with scattered items left behind, including workout equipment, protein powder, and some clothing. Ahmed Ali, an SDF fighter deployed at the facility, said the Russian forces began evacuating their positions around the airport 5 or 6 days ago, withdrawing their equipment via a cargo plane. We don't know if its destination was Russia or the Mymym air base, he said, referring to the main Russian base on Syria's coast. They still have a presence in Kamashli and have been evacuating bit by bit. There has been no official statement from Russia about the withdrawal of its forces from Kamashli. Russia has built relations with the new central Syrian government in Damascus since former President Bashar Assad was ousted in December 2024 in a rebel offensive led by now interim President Ahmad al-Sharaa, despite the fact that Moscow was a close ally of Assad. Moscow's scorched earth intervention in support of Assad a decade ago turned the tide of Syria's civil war at the time, keeping Assad in his seat. Russia didn't try to counter the rebel offensive in late 2024, but gave asylum to Assad after he fled the country. Despite having been on opposite sides of the battle lines during the civil war, the new rulers in Damascus have taken a pragmatic approach to relations with Moscow. Russia has retained a presence at its air and naval bases on the Syrian coast. Al-Sharaa is expected to visit Moscow on Wednesday and meet with Putin. Fighting broke out early this month between the SDF and government forces after negotiations over a deal to merge their forces together broke down. A ceasefire is now in place and has been largely holding. After the expiration of a 4-day truce Saturday, the two sides announced the ceasefire had been extended by another 15 days. Syria's defense ministry said in a statement that the extension was in support of an operation by U.S. forces to transfer accused Islamic State militants who had been held in prisons in northeastern Syria to detention centers in Iraq. Japanese court orders North Korea to pay damages to survivors of deceptive repatriation program. A Japanese court on Monday held North Korea responsible for the human rights violations of 4 plaintiffs lured to the north by Pyongyang's post-war false promise of living in paradise on earth, ordering its government to pay them $143,000 each, a decision welcomed by the survivors and their supporters as groundbreaking. Kenji Fukuda, a lawyer for the plaintiffs, said it was significant to win a court decision acknowledging North Korea's human rights violations. However, the ruling is just a piece of paper, and getting the compensation money is a challenge, he said. Paradise on Earth was a land of no freedom and abuses. The Tokyo District Court ruled that the plaintiffs, both ethnic Koreans and Japanese, were forced into decades of harsh conditions without freedom to return home after moving to North Korea with tens of thousands of others under a 1959 to 1984 repatriation program, in which the North gave them false promises of free healthcare, education, jobs, and other benefits. Judge Tashi Kamino said the plaintiffs lived under harsh conditions and without freedom of choosing a residence, school, or jobs for decades, often without food and in severe cold. It's not an overstatement to say most of their lives were ruined by North Korea, he said, ordering the North's government to pay damages totaling 88 million yen, or $572,000 to the plaintiffs. 8-year legal battle without North Korea's presence. Originally, 5 plaintiffs filed a lawsuit in 2018 with the Tokyo District Court seeking $650,000 each in compensation for illegal solicitation and detainment. 2 of those have since died, but one's case was taken up by his son, so there are now 4 plaintiffs. In a 2022 ruling, the court acknowledged that the plaintiffs moved to North Korea because of false information given by the North and a pro-North organization in Japan called Chongryon, but rejected their compensation claims on grounds of a lack of Japanese jurisdiction and expiration of the statute of limitations. On appeal, the Tokyo High Court ruled in 2023 that the North Korean government violated the plaintiffs' fundamental rights and acknowledged Japan's jurisdiction over the case, sending it back to the lower court and ordering it to review damages. Japan and North Korea have no diplomatic relations, and the North has not responded to the lawsuit or sent representatives to court. Survivors staked their lives and fled. One of the four plaintiffs, Aiko Kawasaki, 83, a second-generation Korean born in Kyoto, boarded a ship to North Korea in 1960 after Shongryeon's repeated promotion of the Paradise on Earth. In a 2021 interview with the Associated Press, Kawasaki said she realized she was deceived when she arrived in a North Korean port, where she was met by hundreds of cadaverous people covered with soot, and she saw shabby buildings. She was stuck in that country for 43 years until 2003, when she defected to Japan via China, leaving behind her grown children, becoming a rare survivor. One of Kawasaki's daughters and her 2 children have since successfully fled, but she has lost contact with the others since the North shut its borders over the coronavirus pandemic. "I don't even know if they are alive," she said. Kawasaki said the ruling is just a start. "I think North Korea will ignore the ruling. I don't think Kim Jong-un would react or comment," Kawasaki said. Fukuda, the lawyer, said the seizure of possible North Korean assets in Japan could be a way to get damages, though he did not elaborate. Plaintiffs want Japanese government to help. Kawasaki said she hoped to also seek the responsibility of Shongryeon and get an apology from the Japanese government over the repatriation deal signed between the Japanese and North Korean Red Cross societies, even though Japan was not actively promoting the program. She urged the Japanese government to provide support for the repatriation victims stuck in the North, saying they have suffered just like the Japanese abducted to North Korea in the 1970s, 80s. Kane Doi, Japan director at Human Rights Watch, urged the Japanese government to build on the ruling and press North Korea to take responsibility so that other victims and their families can resettle in Japan. About 500,000 ethnic Koreans live in Japan and still often face discrimination. Many are descendants of Koreans put to work for forced labor at mines and factories during Japan's 1910 to 1945 colonization of the Korean peninsula, a past that has repeatedly strained ties between Japan and the Koreas. In 1959, North Korea began a resettlement program to bring overseas Koreans to the North to make up for workers killed during the Korean War. The Japanese government viewed ethnic Koreans as outsiders and welcomed the program, helping arrange for people to travel to North Korea. More than 93,000 ethnic Korean residents of Japan, their Japanese spouses and relatives, moved to the North. About 150 have made it back to Japan, according to a group supporting defectors from North Korea. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier radio reading service. North Korea launches ballistic missiles into the sea between Korean Peninsula and Japan. North Korea launched short-range ballistic missiles toward its eastern waters on Tuesday, according to its neighbors, as the North heightens animosities with rival South Korea ahead of a major political meeting. South Korea's military said it detected liftoffs of several ballistic missiles from an area north of the North Korean capital, Pyongyang, before the missiles each flew about 217 miles. Japan's defense ministry said 2 ballistic missiles launched from North Korea and landed off the eastern coast of the Korean peninsula. The ministry condemned the launches as a threat to the peace of Japan, the region, and the international community. South Korea's military said it maintains a firm readiness to repel any provocations by North Korea. The launches were the first time North Korea fired weapons since testing what it called hypersonic missiles in early January. In December, the country test-fired what it called long-range strategic cruise missiles and new anti-air missiles and released photos showing apparent progress in the construction of its first nuclear-powered submarine. North Korea has engaged in a run of weapons launches to enlarge its nuclear and missile arsenals since talks with the U.S. and South Korea stalled in 2019. Experts say the North's leader, Kim Jong-un, believes a bigger weapons arsenal would give him greater leverage to win concessions from the U.S. North Korea's recent displays were likely meant to demonstrate or review its weapons development achievements ahead of the upcoming ruling Workers' Party Congress, analysts said. The Congress, expected to start in February, would be the first of its kind in 5 years and is one of North Korea's biggest propaganda spectacles used to set up new political and economic priorities. North Korea recently threatened retaliation over what it called 2 South Korean surveillance drone flights across the border, one earlier in January and another in September. The South Korean government denied operating any drones during the time specified by North Korea and began probing if civilians sent them. The accusations likely were driven by the North's efforts to dial up anti-South Korea sentiments ahead of the Congress, when Kim's previous declaration of a hostile two-state system on the Korean Peninsula could be added to the party constitution, analysts said. Venezuela releases dozens of prisoners in 2 days. Hundreds more still detained. Venezuela's leading prisoner rights organization said Monday that dozens of prisoners were released over the weekend, as the United States continues to pressure the acting government to free hundreds of dissidents jailed under ousted leader Nicolas Maduro. Alfredo Romero, president of Foro Penal, said in a post on X that 266 political prisoners had been freed since January 8th, when Venezuela's acting government promised to release a significant number of prisoners in what it described as an effort to promote national reconciliation. At least 100 of these prisoners were released over the past 2 days, according to figures published by the group. Maduro was captured by the United States in a raid January 3rd and was replaced by Vice President Delcy Rodriguez, a longtime ruling party insider who is now the nation's acting president. I am pleased to report that Venezuela is releasing its political prisoners at a rapid rate, which rate will be increasing over the coming short period of time. I'd like to thank the leadership of Venezuela for agreeing to this powerful humanitarian gesture, U.S. President Donald Trump said in a Truth Social post. According to human rights groups, prisoners released this weekend included an opposition activist, a human rights lawyer, and a journalism student who was jailed in March after he published complaints about his hometown's sewage system and was charged with inciting hatred. However, at least 600 dissidents remain detained in Venezuela, according to Foro Penal, including several members of the Vente Venezuela Party, led by opposition leader and Nobel Peace Prize winner Maria Corina Machado. On Friday, Rodriguez said that her administration had freed more than 620 prisoners, adding that she would ask the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights to verify the release lists. On Monday, Venezuela's Interior Minister Diosdado Cabello said in a news conference that 808 prisoners had been freed since December. Human rights groups in Venezuela have accused the government of inflating the number of freed prisoners, while officials claim non-governmental organizations are merely trying to undermine state credibility. Cabello said Monday there were no political prisoners in Venezuela, only people who committed crimes. Outside Venezuela's prisons, relatives of detainees have held regular vigils to demand the release of those still behind bars. Mexico investigates soccer field attack that killed at least 11 people. Beer cans, candles, and blood-stained clothing littered a soccer field in central Mexico on Monday, a day after gunmen killed 11 people and injured 12 others during a gathering after an amateur match. While authorities investigate the killings, Guanajuato State Governor Libia Denise Garcia said Monday that security in the region has been reinforced with state and federal forces. She said on social media that the state will act decisively to protect families, restore peace to the community, and bring those responsible to justice. The massacre took place in the municipality of Salamanca, in the state with the highest number of homicides in the country. The region has been racked by intense violence linked to the territorial dispute between the local Santa Rosa de Lima cartel, a violent group primarily dedicated to fuel theft and trafficking, and the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, CGNG. According to a federal official familiar with the case who requested anonymity because it is an ongoing investigation, initial evidence suggests that some of the deceased people were linked to a private security company associated with the CJNG. The official added that prior to the attack, messages attributed to the Santa Rosa cartel were found mentioning their dispute with Jalisco. The attack comes a few months before the start of the FIFA World Cup, which Mexico is co-hosting with Canada and the United States, and as the government of Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum not only seeks to highlight its progress in security, but is also promoting local soccer and its fan base as the powerful tool for integral development of the population, according to Mexican Interior Secretary Rosa Isela Rodriguez. Salamanca Mayor Cesar Prieto, the only official to provide early details on Sunday, described the massacre as part of a wave of violence and appealed to Sheinbaum for help. Nancy Angelica Conjura, researcher for Causa Común, a non-governmental organization that analyzes data on insecurity, said that regardless of whether or not those killed were linked to criminal activity, the fact that the attack occurred in a public place and during a festive activity has a large social impact because it stays in the public consciousness that you can't go out by choice, you shouldn't stay in public spaces. Conjura also mentioned that during 2025, Guanajuato was the scene of attacks at funerals, parties, and other public activities, and that all dilutes the social fabric, limits life in the community, and allows criminal groups to have more power. Sheinbaum didn't address the events in Salamanca during her news briefing on Monday, deferring to the local prosecutor's office, which has only confirmed an ongoing investigation. Security analyst David Saucedo, who was based in Guanajuato for many years, suggests the attack was likely by the Santa Rosa de Lima cartel. According to Saucedo, the group may have wanted to provoke a federal military surge into territory currently held by its rivals, the Jalisco cartel, a move, he says, undermines the image of security Mexico hopes to project on the eve of the World Cup. The Jalisco cartel is the fastest-growing criminal organization in Mexico. It was declared a terrorist organization by the Trump administration, which also targeted the Santa Rosa de Lima cartel. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the January 27th issue of the Toronto Star. Your reader has been Brian. Thank you for listening.